I'll finish that.
We had an interesting vote today on the trade agreement, and I know my friends at Club for Growth had scored that. They wanted people to vote yes because they believed, as some have said, it's about free trade, but it's a bit ironic for those who follow politics because on the one hand, Republicans were being told this will allow us to force the president to keep us apprised, to give us notice of what's going on so that we can rein anything in that's not helpful to the country. I didn't have that impression of the bill, not when reading the TPA, not going to the classified setting. I mean, I did that. I read the TPP, most of it. Having been a lawyer, judge, prosecutor, done defense, Chief Justice, I've litigated a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of loopholes in that TPP. There were loopholes in the TPA. But one of my Democratic friends was telling me, Mr. Speaker, that they were being told, and that the whole reason the president came up here is that by passing this trade agreement, it's going to allow the president to get his agenda done in the next 18 months without Congress being able to stop him. Some of my Democratic friends prefer that Congress have more say than that, and some were not happy with the proposal at all. They also were smart enough to know there are a lot of American jobs that will be lost because of that bill. But and I'm not an isolationist. I believe in free trade, but I don't believe in free reign for a president, and I'm afraid that's what it would do, and that's why I had to vote no once again. But it passed, and now we will see if the president, if what some of my Democratic friends were told is accurate, that bill will allow the president to achieve his agenda without Republicans being able to stop him. It appeared that way to me reading the bills. He's got enough loopholes he can take advantage of. And plus, even without loopholes, requirement of notification, he was required to notify us before he released anybody from Guantanamo. He didn't do it. He went ahead and released 5 of the worst murderers in return for a guy that we're told is about to be charged with desertion. So the president doesn't seem to be bogged down by having to follow the law, but I'm impressed with my friends that think, but if we pass one more law that makes him give us notice, this time after 6.5 years of not keeping us apprised as the law requires, this time we think he really, really will. And I'm impressed with that kind of optimism, even though the old expression here in Washington is, no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. Sometimes I think there's merit to that. But in any event, Mr. Speaker, there is an issue far more important than trade that is about to hit this country. It could create a constitutional crisis of proportions that some of the justices on the Supreme Court can't imagine. But, Mr. Speaker, I blew up the law. This is the law. It's not an ethical requirement. I mean, having been a prosecutor, defense, heck, I was even court-appointed to appeal a capital murder conviction. I don't know how many here on the floor have appealed a capital murder conviction. I begged the judge not to appoint me. He did anyway. And when I got into the thousands of pages of records, I found out he had not gotten a fair trial. I fought for him to the highest court in Texas and got the death penalty reversed. Some clients felt like I was a pretty good lawyer. back before I went on the bench that I got the only jury verdict against what was then the largest oil company in the world. I don't know if it was or is. That's what I was told. So I know something about practicing law. I know something about being a judge. And I know that when there was any case in which the public would suspect that I could not be impartial, I would have to recuse myself. Sometimes judges will just recuse themselves so they don't have to make a tough call. I never did that. But there are times when you have such a strong opinion about a matter, you have no business sitting on that case. Now, ethical requirements would insist that a judge conduct their performance as a judge in such a way that it comports with the requirements of the canons of ethics. However, this isn't an ethical violation that would get you a letter from some bar president or from somebody saying, we think you violated the canons of ethics. This isn't it. This is United States law. This is the law of the land. This is part A. Part B goes into some different possibilities where a judge might have to recuse him or herself, but it's volume 28 of the United States Code, section 455, and section many subparts to it like B does. B is, like I say, other examples where the judge might have to recuse themselves. But A is unequivocal. Any justice, judge, or magistrate judge of the United States shall, that's a shall disqualify himself, generic male and female, in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. This is not some model code of ethics. This is the United States law. And no one in the country, including on the United States Supreme Court, is supposed to be above the law. And as we've talked about, we have two justices that have performed same-sex marriages. And in fact, Justice Ginsberg, in the article by Greg Richter, May 18th of 2015, he's quoting from Maureen Dowd in her article where Maureen Dowd says, quote, with a sly look and special emphasis on the word Constitution, Justice Ginsburg said that she was pronouncing the two men married by the powers vested in her by the Constitution of the United States. Now, there is no question that Justice Ginsburg is biased, prejudiced. She has her own opinion about this matter. She has had her opinion about this. That was clear in the first same-sex marriage she performed. For her not to disqualify herself is a violation of the law of the United States. And yet we're told that Justice Ginsburg is not going to recuse herself, that she wants to be part of a majority opinion. So what happens when someone who is disqualified for sitting on a case sits on a case anyway in order to use their partial, biased position to bring about a majority opinion, it would certainly seem that that would be an illegal act. Not criminal. This isn't a criminal law, but it's an illegal act for someone to violate this law. And then, of course, we also had Justice Kagan, as mentioned, fall of last year, September of last year. The Hill, Peter Sullivan reported that Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan officiated a same-sex wedding on Sunday. A court spokeswoman told the Associated Press, "The ceremony in Maryland for a former law clerk is the first same-sex wedding that Kagan has performed. Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg and retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor have performed same-sex weddings in the past. Gay marriage," the article says, "has been a divisive topic at the Supreme Court, as it has been elsewhere in the country." The article says the court could decide as early as this month whether to take up the issue again in the coming session, this time to consider a more sweeping ruling declaring a right to same-sex marriage across the country. Ginsburg said last week that unless an appeals court allows gay marriage ban to stand, there's no need for us to rush on a Supreme Court ruling, but they took the case up. And now we're told they're going to rule this month, by June 30th of this month. So clearly, Justice Kagan is disqualified. She has had a profound opinion, not just, it says, if the impartiality, or in which impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Well, there are different standards of evidence in the law. Some states use different burdens of proof. You can have, more likely than not, one more, if it's a group like on a jury, one more than half. Preponderance of the evidence, that it's more likely than not, then you find that way. Probable cause is an issue that has an evidentiary requirement. It's got to be probably something is likely or has occurred. Preponderance of the evidence, I mentioned, beyond a reasonable doubt is what most criminal courts have before you can find someone guilty. Evidence must be beyond a doubt. There are some courts that use a standard called clear and convincing evidence. This United States law doesn't use any of those standards. It is a very weak threshold before a judge or a justice must disqualify themselves. They must disqualify themselves. And I hated the fact that Justice Scalia, some years back, had to disqualify himself, but he had already had an opinion expressed about, I believe it was the Pledge of Allegiance, and so couldn't be sure that it wouldn't end up a 4-4 decision, which meant the Ninth Circuit decision would stand, that struck down under God in the pledge, as I recall. But he disqualified himself. Justice Scalia followed 28 U.S.C. 455. He disqualified himself because his judgment, his partiality, might reasonably be questioned. His impartiality. It appeared that he was partial. He had an opinion in the case. So he disqualified himself. That is acting in accordance with the law. But, Mr. Speaker, I keep coming back to this. It's a matter of a constitutional crisis when the highest court in the land not merely strikes down and says, our opinion is more important than the Moses depicted up there in the center point of this room, more important than the Moses depicted in the marble wall over at the Supreme Court holding the Ten Commandments. The Supreme Court says more important than the opinions established and stated by Jesus Christ when he said, and he was quoting Moses, a man shall leave his mother and father, a woman leave her home, and the two will come together and be one flesh. And what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. I mean, that's the law of God according to Moses. It's the law of God according to Jesus. And so it's tough enough if you have a United States Supreme Court who back in the 1890s said, this is clearly a Christian nation, despite what any opinions may be, the evidence established. This country was established as a Christian nation. And the great thing is that if a nation is established on Judeo-Christian beliefs, it allows anybody to live here and to function here and to do so without impediment to their beliefs, because you can be an atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Muslim. You can be any of those things as long as you're not trying to take over the country like some would like to do. But otherwise, by basing a country on Judeo-Christian beliefs, we have provided more freedom for individuals than any nation in the history of the world. And yet, we may have an ultimate crisis here when a court says our opinion is more important than God, if there is one, more important than Moses, more important than Jesus. Our opinion is not only more important than those people, it's the law of the land, and it's so important that our opinion count that we are going to violate the law ourselves in order to force our opinion, clearly what it is, our opinion on the United States of America. I don't want anybody to be prejudiced against anybody else. I was sick to my stomach this morning hearing about the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. This evil perpetrator killed my brothers and sisters. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. Skin color does not matter one bit. He killed my brothers and sisters. I hope America joins me in mourning. I know the people on both sides of this aisle do. At our prayer breakfast this morning, we prayed and will continue to pray for the families of those who are lost. Those Christians, we as Christians believe, as Jesus told the thief beside him, this day you'll be in paradise with me. We believe they're better off than any of us here in the United States or on earth. Because of their beliefs, we believe they're in paradise with Jesus himself, with the Lord. But it's the terrible wake they leave behind that is so tragic. State senator, from all accounts, a good man, not only but a really good man, pastor. 3 men, 6 women. So our hearts go out to them. We don't want anybody to be prejudiced against anybody. But when it comes to the founding block, the foundation of any solid society, it doesn't matter what relationships exist. It doesn't matter who loves or is friends with whom. As a Christian, I think I can love most everybody. There's a few it's kind of tough, but most everybody. I got some Democrats over here. I love them. They're just wonderful people. They're wrong on issues, but I love them. They're great folks. There's no animus. But when it comes to the foundation of this nation, the home, a mother and a father, regardless of what other relationships may exist, and between siblings, between anybody else, what matters is you don't destroy the central building block. And I was intrigued when the Iowa Supreme Court back in 2009 didn't use these words, but basically said, you know, there's no evidence in nature to indicate a preference of a marriage being between a man and a woman. And it was clear the people of Iowa spoke. I love those folks. They were awesome. They came out, and for the first time since the up or down retention vote started, I understand it 60 or 62 or so, they threw out the judges that were up for re-election because the vast majority of Iowa knew that's ridiculous. Nature makes very clear that you start a family, whether you keep both a mother and father, things happen. There's so many of our greatest Americans have arisen from orphanages or from single-parent homes, but still it doesn't get away from the optimum being. Nature says you're best off if you have a mother and father. They can produce children. Yes, you can adopt children, sure. But that's where nature comes in and says, yeah, but the optimum is a mother and a father in a home. And I know there are some who involved in same-sex marriage, they're not able to love as I do. They hate anybody that disagrees with them. There are some that can love me, though we disagree. I hope that the continued hatred that's been growing among some in the same-sex community can be tamped down. But this is an issue that is foundational to any society that's going to maintain strength, going to maintain viability for a long time into the future, rather than show we just crossed another milestone on our way to the dustbin of history. This is something that's important to our society, to our foundation. Let's love everybody. Let's use law enforcement to stop those like the evil perpetrator in Charleston, like the left-winger, I think it was in North Carolina, that killed the Muslims. There's no call for that. Man needs to go to prison. In Texas, we would say it's a multiple murder. I would say you need to get the death penalty for killing more than one Muslim. No place for that. But again, when it comes to the optimum home, a loving mother and father can procreate, adopt. But regardless of who agrees or disagrees, this is going to be a civilization changer, and it's not going to be for the better. We're going to continue our divisiveness and destructiveness, because when the highest court in the land has justices that say, my opinion is so much more important than the Bible, Moses, Jesus, my opinion is so much more valuable that I am going to violate the law. I'm going to break the law so I can sit on this opinion so the country can have my forced opinion on it. I know there are Christian leaders, some are ready to capitulate, but there are some that won't. But we are now to the point, Steve King and I and some others addressed back when the hate crime bill was being discussed, that we're going to lead to the point where you ultimately persecute, eventually prosecute people because of their beliefs about sexuality. people then were wrong because they couldn't see the future. But this is where we've come. Now, if you hold the same beliefs that David Axelrod said the president didn't, but he said it in order to get elected, that a marriage is a man and a woman, you hold that belief that most Americans have held and still hold, that the founders all held, regardless of their sexuality. They believed a family, marriage at least, was a man and a woman, that was foundational. So I'm not sure what's going to happen in this country. I don't have that kind of crystal ball. But I know if we have 2 or 3 justices who are clearly disqualified, who have clearly indicated, not only raised questions as to whether they could be reasonably questioned as to their impartiality, they made clear they are very, very partial. I don't know what happens, but it isn't going to be good at all. We had Justice Sotomayor has made statements that indicate she has an opinion before this case was decided. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope scholars will look carefully at this and they will understand if Supreme Court justices violate the law in order to change the law dramatically, as they want to do, is that a valid law? I don't believe it is. If they break the law in order to make the law, it's a void law. They need to recuse themselves and let an impartial group on the court make the decision. Should be left to them. But it's probably sufficient grounds for impeachment for a Supreme Court justice to violate the law so that they can force their will upon the American people, to push through their legislative agenda, even though they're not legislators. Probably impeachment would be in order. If they break the law in order to change dramatically the law, it shouldn't be on the Supreme Court. It's my hope and prayer they will do the legal thing, recuse themselves before the court makes a final decision with regard to marriage. If they don't, they will go down in legitimate American history books as being exceedingly destructive, and history will note that they violated the law in order to change the law so that it would be the way they wanted. Not with a constitutional amendment, not through a legislative process, not by a constitutional convention that Article 5 provides for. They just had the feeling that they wanted to tinker with over 200 years of law and foundational societal structure and force America to abide by their legislative agenda. And again, I just can't get over it. If they don't disqualify themselves, they will violate the law to try to change the law with the agenda they've made clear that they have. So, Mr. Speaker, Americans will join me in not only hoping but praying that their hearts will be touched, that they will decide not to act illegally, that they will be moved toward acting lawfully, disqualify themselves, and let us get a proper opinion from the Supreme Court. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.